Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to our Shadow Empire tutorial series. In this video, we're going to take it a little bit further and we're going to talk about governance. So we're going to handle such topics as leaders and factions, and we're going to talk about the economy and resources. We're also going to touch on trade a little bit. We're going to talk about the various reports and the dashboard and stuff, and also the profiles here. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. We're going to talk a little bit about research and all the different texts and stuff like that, and how to optimize them, and how to optimize your research and really get the most out of that. We're going to talk a bit about zone management and like construction and just zone stability and all that kind of stuff. And then if we have time at the end, I'd like to dip a little bit into diplomacy just to give you an idea of what's possible with that. Alright, so you've made it for your first few turns, you've expanded your army a little bit, you've moved your troops out, you've appointed a few leaders, you've set up a council, you've taken a look at, your bureaucratic points, where they're going, you've clicked around your stratagems. But now what, right? Like, what do you do now? How do you set your empire up for success? How do you make sure that everything's going to run smoothly and just be a little easier experience rather than descending into chaos as you play the game? So the first thing you want to look at with regards to this is going to be your leaders. So the happiness of your leaders is going to sort of dictate sort of how the rest of your game goes. They're an extremely important facet of your empire, and so it's really, really important to keep them happy and keep them, satisfied and engaged. So how do you do that? So as we alluded to in the very first video, one of the primary ways to make sure your leaders are going to be happy throughout the game is by making sure they're at least semi-aligned to your cause. So let's take a look at Ignatius Oaks here, just as an example. We'll click on him and get an idea of his profile here. So you can see he loves democracy. He has +3 here, and he also loves heart, which means that whenever we make a decision that's pro-democracy, he's going to love it. If we make a decision that's pro-heart, he's going to like it. And when we do those things, his profile, or his relationship with us, I should say, is going to go up a little bit. He doesn't have any hates. Like, there's nothing he dislikes, which means when we make a meritocracy decision or a commerce decision or a fist decision, he's going to be indifferent to it. He doesn't hate these profiles. He just doesn't have any particular liking for them, right? So he's not aligned, but he's also not misaligned. Like that one other lady, I forget what her name was in the video, or I think it was our governor, and she was just completely hilariously unaligned with our cause. But this guy is not, right? So that's the very first way. Alright, so I've advanced the turn with the hopes of getting a decision that's going to showcase this for us. And we have one here. So if we say yes to this request, a couple things will happen. One, we will gain +7 in our heart profile. But the larger effect that we're concerned with right now is this number here. So you see +2, +7, +1. What that means is if we make this decision, this guy here, Ignatius, he is going to like that decision because, as you see, he likes heart a little bit. He likes heart a little bit, which means when we make this heart-related decision, his thing goes up a little bit. And you see this chick here, and I think this might have been it, actually, yeah. So she loves heart, right? This is the chick I was talking about who's not super aligned with us. She loves heart, which is why when we make a heart decision, her relationship with us goes up quite a bit, right? So that's kind of what that means. And the exact same is true in the opposite. So it works conversely, right? So if we say no to this, we lose heart profile, we gain a little bit of enforcement, and as a result, Ignatius hates it. His relationship will go down, her relationship will go down. This other guy, G. Wood, his relationship will go down. So that's kind of how the decisions are going to affect your leader's relationship with you. So this is one avenue of how you can get your relations with leaders up. You can take decisions which sort of, pander to them, I guess, if you want. But this is exactly why you want leaders that are aligned with your profile, because ultimately you want to get your profiles up, and we're going to go into profiles in this video, but you do want to raise your profiles up because you get access to better bonuses. But in order to do that without this kind of crap, without your leaders getting pissed off at you, it's good to have leaders that are aligned with those profiles, right? So this is why we say it's better to have aligned leaders, because aligned leaders are happy with your decisions that are good for your profile, and misaligned leaders are not. Like, we don't want heart. Like, this is not something we want. So normally I would say no, but that's going to piss off all these people who love heart, which is not our profile. So that's the impact of making sure that your people are aligned. And this is going to go on. You can get multiple decisions per turn, and the game can go on for many turns, hundreds of turns potentially, right? So you can imagine the overtime effect of all of this, right? So it's quite significant. So that's the importance of making sure your leaders are aligned. So that's the main way to keep your leaders happy. Because as you remember, in that description of why they like you and why they don't like you, you can see there's 1 part loyalty, 1 part prestige, and 2 parts for leader profile match with regime profile, right? So it is so important to their happiness that they are aligned with your profile. Now, in the rare exception, like we talked about in one of the previous videos, if it's like a cap 5 with just amazing stats, maybe you're willing to suffer it and pay them off and give them bonuses and all kinds of, hero cookies and medals and stuff like that to keep them happy. But by and large, you're much better off with aligned leaders, and this is why. So another way to keep your leaders happy is to pay them more. Everybody loves money. So if you want to do it that way, what you can do is you can call your secretary, and then you can click salaries right here. And then he'll bring up a list of your salaries for all your different kind of job types, I guess. So these are all the different salaries for the different sort of job types, and you can adjust it. So if you want to make your, governor happier, well, you can simply increase the governor's salary. So right now their governors are making 2 credits a turn each. You can increase that to 3, and now they're going to be happier, right? So let's increase up to, like, this is ridiculous, but we'll give them like 7 credits a turn, right? We'll say confirm.
Understood.
We'll see now Nadia, her relationship increase with +4. So we just got a happiness bonus from her because we just absolutely gave her a massive pay raise, so she's happy with us. Another way to make your leaders happier is to give them medals and give them stratagems and stuff. So if we go to stratagems and you go into the leaders tab here, there's a bunch of different stratagems you can play on your leaders to make them happier. You can give them an official gift as an example here. So spend 200 credits for a gift, and you'll do a dice roll, and if you're successful, they'll get a bunch of happiness, right? There's another one that's a little more common, Medal of Merit. So this is, sometimes we call this the Medal of Morons, because you're going to find yourself giving it to problematic people, not people that are legitimately good for your empire. But there is always this. They get 25 relations just like that. No skill checks, no nothing. It also gives them some charisma and all that kind of stuff, some extra stats. But this is a quick and easy one. If you just need, a quick and easy boost for their happiness, the Medal of Merit's a great way to go. And there's a bunch of different stratagems you can play, like Happy Family. You can take care of their family for them. That'll make them happier. So there's a number of different stratagems you can play that potentially will increase the happiness of your leaders, which can be really helpful. Another way, of course, is with giving them a better job. So different jobs come with different levels of prestige, and the more prestigious their job, of course, the happier they're going to be, right? So if we look at, for example, our secretary, and we look at his relation, you can see that job prestige, we're getting 52 points for the prestige of his job. So if you give him a more prestigious job, then he'll be happier. And there's a table in the manual that outlines the different prestige levels of the different jobs. So if you really want, you can always give these people better jobs, which will make them happier. Whether that's something you want to approach or not, I don't know. That's up to you. Me personally, I'd rather have people in the jobs they're good for and make them happier through other means. But if you really want to role play hard or whatever it is, or just maximize their happiness for whatever reason, if you want to do that, you can absolutely do that. That is one way. Just so you know, that's one factor at play when they figure out their happiness. And the other way to influence the happiness of your leaders kind of segues into our next topic, which is, of course, factions. So factions are basically like political parties that form within your empire. So like-minded individuals, they'll kind of rally behind certain regime profiles, and you know what I mean? Like they'll like highly maybe meritocracy aligned people or whatever. They might group together and make a faction based on, meritocratic values, based on the different profiles of the people in your empire, the leaders in your empire. You can get different factions forming. So to check that out, you go to your reports here, and there's going to be a factions overview in the overview section. So you go down here to factions overview, and you can see all the different factions that are in your empire. If you look at this empire, for example, right now there's 2 factions. We have the Sacred School and the Elite Circle. So if you look at Sacred School, you can see that they really like heart, and they like meritocracy a little bit. We have meritocracy, so that's going to gel with them nicely. They love heart, which isn't going to work for them. And then we have the Elite Circle, which loves commerce, and they love meritocracy. This group here, Economic Circle, they're more aligned, as you can clearly see, to our profiles. And why does this matter? Well, faction happiness and member happiness are tied together. If the faction as a whole is really, really happy, that's going to drive up the happiness of its members. And vice versa. If you piss off the faction, you're pissing off the members. Like, if we piss this guy off because he's the faction leader, that could filter down and affect the happiness of anybody else in this faction. So it's a good idea to try and keep your factions happy. So how do you keep factions happy? Well, in addition to accepting their demands and doing the things that they ask of you, you can also try and keep your faction leader, which is the one with the stars on it here. You can see he's got like the blue bars that denote his faction membership. And the one with the stars on the sides, that's the actual faction leader. So if you keep him as happy as possible, that's going to be good because that's going to allow the faction happiness to go up. So pretty much the faction happiness can't really go higher than the leader's happiness. So the more leader happiness you have on the faction leader, the higher up your faction could potentially go. Once in a while, you'll also get stratagem cards, which will allow you to gift directly to the faction. Also, keeping your word score up is very helpful for faction happiness. And in addition, you've got this thing over here. You got your sector, your prof, your power base, your relations. So basically what this is this is letting you know the sort of preferences of this particular faction as to what types of jobs within your administration that the members of the faction want to hold. So as you see, we have three categories: zone administration, national government, and military hierarchy. So essentially, zone administration is governors, national governments, your different council members, like your councilors, sorry, and military hierarchy, of course, is your generals and your leaders and stuff, right? So this particular faction, as you can see, zone administration +3. They have a +3 preference to be put in zone administration roles, which is basically governors, right? And we don't have any governors, right? Neither of these two faction members are governors. Therefore, our representation of this faction within this category is none. And because of that fact, we get a -8 relation with the faction. National government, they don't super care one way or another with a 0 preference here, but the power base is average because we have some people within the national government. He's counted as that, right? And then, of course, military hierarchy, they don't care one way or another, but we have a very strong representation there because, again, one of their members is literally the commander of the Supreme Headquarters. He's like the top general in the entire empire. So we add a +6 for that. And you can look at the Supreme, the Sacred School, see what they're all about. Yeah, same thing. They have the same preference. They also want to be zone administration, which is governors. And now this time, you see they have a very strong representation because Nadia is the governor and she's part of this faction. And so we only have one town, so we have 100% representation within zone administration for this faction. Because of that, we got a +24 relation with this faction. So you can kind of see that putting people of certain factions in a role that their faction prefers is really, really good for faction happiness. Alright, let's move on to reports and profiles. So let's go up to the report screen here. We'll take a look at some of these. We won't go through all of them exhaustively, but we'll give it a basic overview of what's here and what you can use these kind of things for. So you've got a whole bunch of different tabs at the top. You've got overviews, your letterbox, which is like emails, organizations, zones, HQs, regimes, and just kind of a help file here. So let's start with overviews here. We'll just kind of go through them. Your Empire dashboard, you're actually going to be spending a lot of time here. This is a really, really important one. This basically gives you a kind of at-a-glance idea of how you're doing and where you're at. So as an example, this is basically your popularity right here. So we are currently respected with a popularity score of 75. And that's broken down into these things here. So the population support, how much does the population like you? How much do your workers like you? How much do the soldiers like you? How much do your leaders like you, right? And population, that's based on things like, amenities in the town, that kind of thing, right? Whether there's no danger in their towns, which we'll get into, and all that kind of stuff. Worker support is based on a lot of the same things. Also, how much are you paying them, and all these sorts of things. Soldier support, that's largely based on the soldier morale, and morale of the soldiers is largely based on how much you're paying them, as long and they're getting all their supplies, that kind of stuff. So that's a good idea to keep that nice and high. And of course, leader support is really just how much your leaders like you. That's just their relations rate. So it's just kind of a rough estimate of their overall support for you. Word score, this is incredibly, incredibly important. We alluded to this in a previous video. So word score is basically how trustworthy is your word. Do you keep your promises? When a faction makes a demand of you and you agree to do it, do you actually do it, or do you just say, well, screw it? So if you agree to a faction's demand, you will get an immediate small bonus to their relationship with you. And you'll also get a big bonus to their relationship and your word score when you ultimately complete it. Or if you don't complete it, you'll get a huge penalty, right? So if you say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and then you don't end up doing it, you'll get a massive penalty. Versus if you say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to commit to that, you will get an immediate penalty, but it won't be all that severe, and then that's kind of the end of it. So if you don't think you can make a promise, don't do it. So that's where your ward score comes from. So definitely try and keep as many promises as you can. Then we have the different levels of your civilization. So your tech level is just kind of an idea of how many techs you have, right? How many were researched. Your admin level basically talks about how much bureaucratic points you have, as well as how many organizations you have. So it's just the more administration, the more bureaucracy you have, the more this goes up. And this also will affect how high level you can upgrade your assets to. So assets, which we'll get into in a bit, can be upgraded to higher levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing. And they're capped, though, at a value that's based on your admin level. Also, your civilization level will cap that as well. Your civilization level basically is an average of all your zone's civilization levels. And your zone civilization levels are basically to do with like your amenities and how nice it is to live in those zones. And we'll cover that shortly. And then we have these stats down here, which we've already talked about in the previous video, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Next turn's bureaucratic points, or the production, next turn's political point production, credits, prestige areas, and all this kind of stuff. We talked about customized points, that's to do with your staff council, customizing formations. Income tax is at 20% right now. Sales tax, there's nothing on that yet. You can play cards, or stratagem cards to increase that. We have the empire budget, which we talked about before. This is basically just breaking down where the bureaucratic points you're getting are going. So right now we only have the Supreme Command Council. I've reloaded some save games. You're like, wait a minute, where'd the Economic Council go? This is just a slightly older save game that I clicked on for the purposes of recording here, so we don't have it anymore. But basically all of your bureaucratic points are, again, they're split between all of your organizations. Right now we only have one organization, so he's getting all of it. So this is where you come to see that, what breakdown of where your bureaucratic points are going in terms of which councils are getting more bureaucratic points. It also shows you within the council what they're doing with those bureaucratic points. So again, you can see, like we talked about before, the Supreme Command Council right now is splitting their bureaucratic points evenly between generating political power and generating stratagems for us. So once you get more organizations, they'll show up in here and you'll be able to see how they break down. And again, like we talked about before, you can actually influence all of that. Urgent issues, this is actually really important. You may want to look at this from time to time. So this basically talks about anything really urgent going on in your empire. If you've ever played any of the Paradox series of games, like Crusader Kings or, Europa Universalis or anything like that, you'll see once in a while there'll be like flags that pop up along the top bar of your game for like important events. So you click on it and say, oh, you're at war, or you're missing whatever, you need this or whatever. Like important stuff like that. This screen right here is basically Shadow Empire's equivalent of that. So anything important and pressing will come up in here. Right now, of course, we have nothing. So do keep an eye on this. Cabinet overview, it's just a look at your leaders. Personnel overview, again, it's just your leaders, but this time you can sort them. You can sort them and compare them by scores and stats and skills and whatnot, and it's a good way to sort all your guys if you want to look for something specific. Factions overviews, again, we talked about factions, but this is where you'd find all that information. Demands, again, we talked about how factions will make demands of you, and this is where it's going to list all of your demands. This would be a good idea to check every turn or maybe every other turn, just so you don't forget any demands. It's very easy in Shadow Empire with everything going on. It's super, super easy to forget about this sort of stuff. So you may want to poke into here once in a while and just make sure you haven't forgotten about any demands, because when you fail a demand, it sucks. Word score goes down, relationships go down, it sucks. So try and keep an eye on this screen. Feats and bonuses overview. This is actually kind of cool. So this screen basically talks about all the cumulative bonuses you have in the game to do with like public industrial points or political bonus points or any of these little bonuses that add up through various sources, like political bonus points. Some of that is coming from our Supreme Command headquarters. This thing we talked about here, how it gives you political bonus points, remember that? And so you'll see the cumulative total of all your bonuses right here. Technology overview is kind of handy. You can see what techs you have and the techs that you're researching. You can see where they're at as far as their percentage. You can look at it here, or again, you can look at it on the tech screen. I tend to look here, but this is just as good. This is just as handy. It's nice and clean and all organized for you. Formation types, this is basically the different army types you can field. So right now, as you see, we have 5 different independent formations, so we can literally raise 1 unit counter, just like 1 unit worth of independent infantry or independent machine gun or whatever else. But we also have access right now to 3 actual multi-unit formations. These are the ones we talked about earlier, about how you can have a command unit in charge of multiple units. This is kind of like a little army, right? So you literally get 5 counters. If we were to build this, rather than just get 1 counter, we'd literally get 5 counters, plus we would also get a command unit. And in that command unit, that's where you install a general, or a leader rather, a commander, whatever, and that commander provides bonuses to any of his troops that are in range of him. So it's very, very helpful and useful to try and focus on these larger formations as much as you can, because they get lots of bonuses, right, from their commanders. Now you'll notice we don't have all that many formations. We just have really basic stuff right now. If you get the staff council, you can research more. You can get like armored corps and siege infantry and all these other different types of things, right? So your staff council will research more formations, and it will also, as we looked at before, it will also generate customized points like we talked about. And these customized points, again, will let you design your own custom formations, which are really, really cool. That's a really fun aspect of the game, in my opinion. I'd suggest you give that a try if you haven't already. But that'll flesh out this screen for you and get more formations for you to play around with. Models overview, again, shows you your models. You can break them down here. Again, me personally, when I want to look at models, I tend to go over here and just look at them here. But it's total preference. Treasury cash flow, this is actually really important. This is your budget, right? So we could take a look at ours. Total in and outflow, we have 124 credits of revenue and 29 credits of expenses. So what do they call that? Is that in the black? Or, I don't know. I'm not an accountant. I think that means we're in the black. So we're basically making money, right? We're not losing money. And then you can break down where all the money's coming from, right? So we can see in Polymer, we don't have any sales tax. As you remember, our sales tax is set at nothing. Therefore, we're getting 0 credits of revenue from that. However, as you recall, we do have 20% income tax. And these are, of course, things you can change with stratagem cards and the Interior Council. Sometimes your basic Supreme Command Council can give you these cards, but your Interior Council will give you more of these. And so based on this, from Polymer, we're getting 111 credits of income tax revenue from that. And we're also getting service tax. Service tax is not something you can influence directly. Service tax just kind of happens based on the population of the zone. So service tax gives you a little bit of credits, and it also gives you a little bit of industrial points, oddly enough, just to try and make sure your economy doesn't completely stall out on you and you end up in a death spiral. So you get a little bit of IP, industrial points, and you get a little bit of credit from service tax all the time. And then you see, like, salaries, right? You're spending so much on worker salaries on Polymer, right? So this is the actual salary, and this is the total you're spending, right? Based on how many guys you have. So they're each making 0.005 credits, and then multiplied by however many workers you have, totals to 8 credits a turn you're spending on Polymer's public workers, right? So you can see where all the money's going, and then here's your leaders, what they're making a turn. Just as an interesting contrast, I think this is kind of funny. So as an example, the governor of your zone, right, makes 2 full credits per turn, versus your average factory worker or whatever, your average worker in the zone makes 0.005. So, income inequality, but there you go. Welcome to the post-apocalypse, I guess. And then you can see the money you get from regime feats, hex perks, forced sales. Forced sales is basically when you run out of stockpile, and we'll get into that later in the video. But basically, certain resources, you can only store so many, and once you go over that, you'll try and sell it, and that's where that'll show up. So that's the total inflow and outflow. There's your budget, basically. So you want to try and keep this positive. Profile overview just basically talks about, well, your profiles and what's going on over here with this. There's a little bit of a sort of a visualization of what's going on, but you get a similar visualization here. But we'll go into what this means in a minute. Next, you have the corporation overview. So since we're playing with the corporation's story pack enabled, as you recall from our planet generation step, we get this here. So this is the corporation that influences our empire. So basically, if you keep the corporations happy, they'll occasionally, again, just like the cults and sects, they'll give you stratagem cards to play, right? And some of these can be quite powerful, like, oh, here's a free tech, or here's a free tech discovery, or sometimes you can get managers from them. The corporations are really nice to have around. The downside is that they can get control of your zones. So as here, corporation control of the zone, we're at 14. And this can do things like lower happiness of the zone, they can siphon money from the private economy and all that kind of stuff. You can play cards to lower the control of the corporation in the zone, but to be honest with you, I tend to like having the corporations around just for this cards they give me, right? So it's up to you how you want to play that, but the info about the corporations in here gives you all their different stats and stuff, so enjoy that. Cults and sects, exactly the same thing. It tells you what's going on with all the different cults, like the Syndic priests, the Anima cult, and all that kind of stuff. Right now, as you can see, there's one cult active. It is the Church of Syndic. As an example, you can see my current policy towards the cult is no policy, and we can change that if we want. Let's say we want a better relationship with the Church of Syndic so that we can get access to their stratagem cards, right? And their Syndic priests, which are so fun in our units, right? So to do that, we might have a card. Let's see, nation. Yeah, here it is. Church of Syndic. So discuss our policy regarding this cult. So if we play this card, in the next turn, we're going to get a decision on our desk which says, do you want to be in favor of this cult or do you want to be against it? And if you choose in favor, your relationship can start going up, and then you'll start getting, you know, priests that you can spend on your units to help keep their stats up, right? So this is really cool. I really like these cults. A victory overview is, as you might imagine, it tells you how close you are to victory. So the way this works, this is the ranking of all the majors right now and how they're doing. Oddly enough, we're actually in first place right now. That's pretty funny. So right now we have a 3.6 victory score. So our goal in Shadow Empire is to, as this says right here, you want to get at least 50 victory score, all the while keeping your closest competitor 25 below you, right? So if we had 50 and he's got 26, well then we need to go up to 51, right? So we want to keep them 25 below us, and then you win. And the way you get victory score, it's literally the average of these two values. So for example, right now we control 7% of the planet's populace, and we control 0.1% of the planet's surface in terms of just how many hexes we control, right? So the average of 7 and 0.1 is apparently 3.6. So that's our victory score. And that's it. That's literally all it is. So you want to get control of more populace, which means more free growth settlements. It also means conquering more enemy zones. And then, of course, percentage of the planet. You just want to send out your army and start conquering more hexes, right? So that's how you drive up your victory score. It's just land taken and populace under control. So obviously, if you happen to be at war with a big neighbor and he's got a lot of population, well, if you take his big population center, well, that percentage of the population leaves him and goes to you, right? So it flips. So this can be very flip-floppy very quickly. Not so much this. This is a little more gradual, but populace can really flip quick when you're doing wars and stuff. So just bear that in mind. Then we have stratagem generation. This basically talks about where your stratagems are coming from and how you're getting them. So they're broken down into different categories, as you can see, and it's basically telling you how or why this particular card was or wasn't generated. So in this case, major diplomacy stratagems, right? We have a possible choice between open contact, cancel pact clause, give 400 credits, ask for help, and shadow diplomat. So we rolled based on these weightings here. We rolled ask for help, and then there's a separate roll, which is what are the odds of us actually getting that card this turn. We had a 30% chance to get it, and we failed, as you see. We had a 60% chance to get send spy based on these weightings, but we missed it. 40% chance to get recruit merc, but we missed it, right? This is like XCOM percentages and probabilities. You know, we had a 30% chance for offer protection, and we got it. And so for the cost of 6 bureaucratic points, we got an offer protection card, and so on. So this is how the stratagems are generated. So if you're ever curious about, hey, I got this weird card, where'd that come from? You can come in here and see where it came from. Decision archive, this is actually kind of not immensely useful, but it is kind of cool. It keeps track of every decision you've ever made. In this case, our ascension speech. What do we do? Well, as you can see at the bottom there, we chose meritocracy, and it tells you that. So anytime you make a decision in the game, it's going to get archived in here. So if you ever want to go back to it and see what you did, you can. Trade report. So trade is something we're going to get into very, very shortly, but basically you can trade. Spies, basically we don't have any spies out in the world right now. You can play send spy cards. You can play that on other regimes. You can gather intel on them. You can just see their land, expose the map. Spying is very, very critical in this game, so don't sleep on that. Send your spies out, uncover the map, get details on your enemies, and all the details you have about how many spies you have and where they are will show up here. Right now we have none, of course. Prospecting overview is very important. So prospecting is basically looking for resources out on the map. So as you can see, maybe we have, so we have like a metal node here, we have a water node here, or a deposit, I guess you say. So this is what your prospecting guys are going to be looking for, like resources on the map. And so basically what it's saying is in polymer, like in the polymer zone, because we only have this one zone. So in Polymer, we've already discovered one metal deposit hex and one water deposit hex. See, these two. We are sure some further deposits of an unknown type are present somewhere, right? So what they're saying is we discovered these two, but we think somewhere in the borders of this zone there's more resources to be had, right? So as we keep prospecting, as the turns go by and by and by, there's a chance to find that resource that's hidden out there. And when they do find it, it'll pop up on the map. So that's your economic council's prospecting task at work. And the more bureaucratic points you put into that, the quicker they'll discover the nodes. So that's where all this shows up. And the other use of this is really, really important. There are stratagem cards you can get that allow you to sort of force a discovery of prospecting, right? So based on this, we are sure some further deposits are present somewhere. Based on that, you might be tempted to play one of those cards. It's called prospecting push. And so basically you play that card and spend some political points, and it will force, based on a roll, you have to make a skill roll for it. But if you pass the skill roll and there is something hidden, it'll be revealed and you'll get it. Now conversely, if there is nothing to discover, this will tell you, and it is accurate. So it'll say, we are sure there is nothing left to discover, and if you see that, you can safely conserve your prospecting push cards and your political points and just not spend them, because it'll tell you here whether you can possibly discover something. So it's a good way of not wasting your cards and political points. Mining overview, exactly what it sounds like. It just tells you where your mining assets are, how much reserves they have, what level they are, and again, the level refers to how easy it is to get the resources out of the mine. So 7 and 8, that's quite high. It ranges from basically 1 to 9, so the higher the better. So the archaeology overview is kind of like prospecting, but instead of looking for like random resources in the zone, it's specifically looking for archaeological digs within these ruins here. These hexes are ruins, and so sometimes you can find archaeological sites within these. And when you find one, it'll show up as a little pyramid symbol, and there's 3 different rarities. And so when you see that, what you can do is you can build a recycling facility. So we go mining and then this here. So if you build a recycling facility on one of those archaeological sites, you'll set up a dig, and over time you will eventually start extracting artifacts from that dig site, which will show up in the form of those blue cards that we showed in the first video. Those blue like artifact cards, which are free to play, and they're really, really powerful usually. So that's a great thing. If you see any of those pyramid symbols, make sure you get on it and put a recycling facility on that and gather those artifacts. Construction overview just talks about what you're building right now, and right now we're not building anything, but it'll say in such a zone you're building this, there's this many turns left, and so on and so on. So it's a nice way to see what you're building. You can also see similar information over here in the assets. If you go to your different cities, it'll tell you what you're building, but if you want a nice clean list view, you can see it here. Air bridge overview, we're not going to talk about this right now. This is to do with logistics. It's basically you can ship things by plane, for lack of a better explanation, but we'll come back to this in a future video. Letterbox is essentially your email inbox. When things happen, your different leaders will send you emails and let you know about it. It's kind of a fun little role play thing to look at, and sometimes there's useful information in there. But yeah, it's kind of neat to check out. So then you have your organization overviews, and your different councils and organizations will send you information. Right now we only have the Supreme Command Council, hence that's our only overview. And this is basically saying, what we're doing. So again, they've split their bureaucratic points that we're giving them up between, political power generation and stratagem generation. So that's what's going on there. That's just what they're doing with their resources. There's a zone overview, talks about what's going on in your different zones. We have one zone in our control. We have this much population, that many workers, pop happiness, work happiness, loyalty. CAS is cultural adaptation score, basically how integrated they are into our culture, which we'll talk about shortly. Population hunger, worker hunger, and so on. So you get lots of interesting stats about your zones here. It can be a pretty nice at-a-glance view if you want to check for any problems. We have HQ overviews. We only have one HQ right now, which is actually our Supreme headquarters, which doesn't move. But again, we'll get into that after. As you get more headquarters under your control, when you've kind of fleshed out your army and build more field armies and stuff, this will start filling out. So you can get some interesting information there. Regimes, again, this is where when you send out spies into other regimes, you'll gather more and more detail. Like, this is us. We're Tutorialville, of course. We haven't sent any spies into any other regime. We don't have any information on any other majors, so we're not going to get any information right now. But if we found a major and we start sending spies into their territory, we'll get this kind of information about them based on how much, spy recon we have on them. So the more spies we send into their territory, the more information we're going to get on these reports about them, which can be pretty interesting, because right now, as you see, like, this is us, right? We have a tech level of 3.17. You know what I mean? You can compare these stats with the stats of the empire in question, and then you can judge, hey, should I attack them? Should I be friends with them? You know what I mean? So you kind of size them up that way. So this is going to be a pretty helpful screen. And then, of course, we have the help screen with all these little kind of help files here, like planet stats. This is stuff we went over during planet generation. Talking about our deep core gas mod, which is pretty sick. Solar panels mod is actually not bad. Talks about the agricultural crops. You know, again, we went over this in the planet generation. Same thing with all this stuff. This is all the stuff when we generated the planets, but you can go over it again here if you like. Stratagem encyclopedia. That's actually pretty helpful if you're wondering about a particular stratagem, where it comes from, or you're wondering, hey, what kind of stratagems does this particular council or whatever give me? You can look it up here. So, you know what I mean? Like Foreign Affairs Council will give you these stratagems, or as we talked about before, keeping your factions happy. Well, factions will give you these cards, right? If you meet these little requirements here and you keep your factions happy, you can start getting these, or the staff council will give you these, and so on and so on. So this is actually really, really helpful. I really like this particular chart here. So this is a really good one to check out. And again, down here is just some really basic help file. You can go through this. It might not be a bad idea if it's your first time playing. Just check this stuff out. Might not be bad. But that's a basic overview of the reports, which, you know, you don't have to engage with all of these every turn. Like, obviously, you don't, like, I don't do that. Like, I don't think anybody does. But they're nice to engage with once in a while, and they can become quite helpful. Or if you really want like a heavy role play style of game, then yeah, you can totally engage with all these emails and just really get into it. It's fun to play with. It's not super important. It's not critical. Like some of them are critical. Like obviously your dashboard is critical, your empire budget is critical, and a few of these others, like obviously your treasury cash flow, your victory overview, some of these are absolute critical, but a lot of it is just for extra information and flavor. And another thing I wanted to talk about real quick, it's not exactly a report per se, but it is kind of similar to a report. I did want to lump it in here. So it's stats. So if we look at this stats tab, you get a bunch of statistics that you can check out that can be kind of helpful, like troop statistics. How many total troops do you have? What kind of casualties have you sustained? And this is broken up based on, the different nations. You can kind of compare your casualties to their casualties, your kills to their kills, your troops to their troops. I think this is kind of fun to keep track of. I really love these kinds of stats in this kind of game. So if you're into this sort of thing, this is a great screen for it. You can, of course, break it down by different, units and vehicles and things. That's pretty cool. You get logistical stats, but the one I really wanted to show was regime statistics. And there's a particular one in here. Like there's, you can just see all these different interesting stats, zone populace, whatever, troops and victory score and manpower and all this fun stuff. But there's a particular one I want to show you. It's called Capital Price Index. And this, what it does is it keeps track of the price of resources on the trade market, which again we're going to go into shortly, but it keeps track of the trade market per resource. So as you can see on this graph, this is basically the value, and then these are the turns over time. So you can see this particular resource is outpacing all the other ones, right? So you see this is metal. So metal in this game I was playing was a big deal. So what you can do is, as you're going along, let's say we were on this turn, right? Well, what is that, turn 45, 46, whatever that is. So if we're on this turn, we might say, wow, look at that. The price of metal has been sharply dropping. Maybe this might be a good time to buy metal, right? Or then, you look at a big spike up here. Oh, look, the price of metal just rose sharply. Maybe this would be a good time to sell metal. You know what I mean? So you can keep an eye on these charts to get an idea of what's happening with the fluctuation of prices of resources in the market, particularly when you're new and you're looking at the trade window and you're not super sure, like, oh, look, like fuel is selling for 0.61. Is that a good deal? Or, I want to sell some metal and I'm going to get 27 credits per unit. Is that a good price? Like, I don't have a point of reference because I'm new to the game. Well, this window here is a really nice idea for you, right? Like, the prices all kind of start out low, but as you can see, the price of metal went crazy because of everybody's trying to build tanks and all these other things throughout the game, right? So demand goes up, right? So this can be a really good tool to get an idea of what you want to do in terms of buying and selling your resources. This might be a good one to check pretty much every turn. I wouldn't call it a waste of time to check this every turn, just so you don't miss an interesting spike that you can take advantage of. Like, yeah, you can look at your trade window and look at the prices and see if you're happy with the prices, but this is not a bad thing to check. All right, let's take a quick look at profiles now. So over on the left here, this middle tab, this is the profiles thing we were looking at. And again, as we discussed, this is basically the way our empire thinks. It's the way our people feel. It's our politics. right now. On the left, these ones are our kind of, I guess you might call them our dominant profiles, and these are their, I don't know, I guess your subordinate profiles that aren't your main ones right now. So basically what we're looking at is meritocracy, commerce, and fists. So if we go to the management screen here and then click on the profile tab, we can kind of see the progress of our different feats based on our profile. So the way this works is in order to get access to these, there's a couple conditions you need to meet. First, you need the minimum amount of profile. Second, that particular profile has to be your dominant profile. So right now, meritocracy is our dominant profile within our government sort of branch. So we have access to that. Second, we need a certain amount of meritocracy. For example, this first tier, you need 40, and we have more than that, so we have potential here. This second tier, you need 50, which is, and again, we do, which is why we have potential access here. This one needs 60 and 70, 80, and so on. So it gets harder and harder. And the next thing is, you need to have held that profile as the highest one of your profile for so many rounds. And once you've satisfied those conditions, you start to get a percentage chance every turn to get that feat. So just to re-explain that for clarity, let's say, for example, we wanted to get to martial tournaments. So we get these operational command rolls plus 25, which is kind of cool. So let's say we wanted to get that. So there's a few different criteria we need to satisfy in order to get that. The first criteria is that we need, as it says, a profile of at least meritocracy 60 to gain it. We're almost there, right? The second criteria is that meritocracy has to be the dominant profile within our government branch, which right now it is. And the third criteria is that we have to hold those two conditions for so many rounds. So as an example, you might see here, accomplished envoys. We have the requisite meritocracy. Meritocracy is our highest government profile. And you can see here this 2 RD in red, 2 rounds. That means we have 2 more rounds left of satisfying both those conditions before we start getting a percent chance every turn to gain the feat. Same thing with capable supervisors. You can see 6 rounds. So we've satisfied both those conditions, but we need 6 more rounds of continuing to satisfy those conditions before we start getting a chance every turn to gain the feat. And the percentage goes up a little bit every turn. You'll see it'll be like a green percentage here, I think. So that's how this works. Let's say, as an example again, let's say we wanted Warlust. Well, we would have to keep our fist as our highest profile. We would need at least 50 fists, and we'll need to hold those two things for a certain amount of turns. And once we did, we start getting a chance to get Warlust every turn. So that's kind of how these profiles work. So you can kind of take a look around. If there's anything in here that sounds interesting to you, you can maybe go for it that way and kind of base which profiles you want based on that. As we talked about before, it's very important that your leaders are aligned with your profiles so that you don't have rogue leaders, you know, causing rebellions or just generally causing trouble or becoming discontent and all that kind of stuff and affecting their work and all that kind of stuff. So very important to keep your leaders in line with your profiles. And the other aspect about profiles is how they suppress one another. So the way this works is certain profiles will actually suppress other profiles. So as one profile goes up, it's going to force another one down. And this is the order that happens in here. You see these arrows here? So what this is saying is meritocracy suppresses democracy. Democracy suppresses autocracy. And autocracy suppresses meritocracy. What does that mean? Well, when 2 profiles are touching like this, like these two or these two or these two, they cannot have a combined total of more than 100. So you see meritocracy has 59 and autocracy has 33. That means there's room, for example, for autocracy to grow without suppressing meritocracy. That's why these are all blue. If we look at our reports, actually, profile overview, it talks about it down here. Blue signifies that profiles are neither suppressed nor doing any suppression, and yellow profiles are suppressed and suppress others themselves. Green are not suppressed but do suppress another one. So you can kind of see these different color codes of what's going on. Right now they're blue. Nobody's suppressing anybody else because none of them we haven't reached 100 between the two. So as an example, like I was saying before, we have 59 and 33, which add up to less than 100, right? But let's say, for example, let's say our meritocracy was at 70, and then we have autocracy at 33. That's 3 points over 100, which would mean that autocracy would suppress my meritocracy. So if I had 70 meritocracy this turn and 33 autocracy, on the following turn, my meritocracy would lower because autocracy would force it down because autocracy suppresses meritocracy, right? Conversely, if we had 70 democracy and 33 autocracy, in the following turn, the autocracy score would lower because democracy suppresses autocracy, right? So this is how the game balances it out, so you can't just have all the profiles at once. You pretty much have to pick 3. You can get away with maybe a little bit of a secondary profile if you want to do, like, you know, kind of weak profiles, and you can certainly do that. Just take a look at the profiles screen and see what they offer you and get an idea of some of these bonuses. Like, example, you know, with 50 enforcement, you can get a logistical bonus of 50%, which is pretty huge. You know, we'll talk about that in the logistics video, but that's pretty huge, you know. You know, if you get, as an example, let's go down to mind, like logical thought, if you go up to, you know, 60% mind score, 60 mind score, you can get 40% research bonus, which is pretty huge. If you go up to, what is it, yeah, if you go up to 70 government, you can get a bureaucratic bonus of 60%, which is huge. You can certainly go with like low-level profiles to try and get a mix. That's up to you. I don't know that I would recommend it, but you can certainly try it. There's nothing wrong with doing that if that's your playstyle. But that's kind of how profiles work. So they suppress one another. They prevent each other from totaling more than 100. So again, between like an enforcement and commerce profile, the total of these cannot be more than 100. Same thing here, same thing here. So they all kind of suppress each other in a loop. All right, and on that note, let's talk about the economy, resources, and the trade feature. So let's start with resources. So resources is this top tab right here. So when you click on that, it pulls out this list of all the various resources that are in the current Supreme headquarters that you have selected. We have food. This is what you need to basically keep your soldiers alive. You're going to need to send them food or they're going to starve in the field. You also need this for all your empire in general. Everybody needs food. The more population you have, the more you need to feed. So you need to get lots and lots of food. You do not want to run out of food. Very, very important. There's later game techs and buildings that can convert food into fuel and stuff like that. So food's a very important resource, obviously. Water is primarily for your agricultural assets, like your farms and stuff like that. And depending on the planet type, you might have more or less water. If you're playing on a desert planet, obviously you're not going to have a lot of water, so it's very, very precious depending on where you're at. Oil is primarily used pretty much to fuel your tanks and your vehicles, right? So you need that for your mechanized and your armored formations. Ammo, of course, all of your fighting units are going to need that, so make sure you have a lot of that. There's buildings that can create ammo for you, ammunition factories. You can also create ammo over here in the workshop using metal and industrial points, though this is inefficient. In a pinch, you can totally do it, but it's much more efficient to use one of those ammo factories. And some of your military units will use an obscene amount of ammo. Like, as an example, this heavy bomber right here, man, the ammo this thing uses, it's crazy. And the artillery use a lot of ammo, the missile launchers use a lot of ammo, so it might seem like a lot of ammo when you're playing with the initial game's units, just like the little light infantry and all that kind of stuff running around. But when you start getting into tanks and rocket launchers and missile launchers and bombers and artillery, you can chew through that ammo frighteningly fast, so make sure you've got lots of ammo production. Metal is used to build mostly your tanks and all your mechanized units. It's a very important resource, as you saw in that graph we showed earlier. Very, very important, so don't forget about that. You need lots of metal all the time. It's also a good source of income if you're not using your metal, but you're still harvesting it. Really great resource to sell. Industrial points is immensely important. This is what you're going to use to literally build everything. If you build it, it takes IP. You build roads, it takes IP. You build units, it takes IP. You know, buildings takes IP. Everything takes IP. So you need lots and lots of industry to keep your empire running. So this is an incredibly important resource. Energy, that's electricity. So this is going to basically fuel a lot of your buildings, like your heavy industry buildings. A lot of your buildings are going to require electricity to run. Like, as you can see, social housing requires 5. These apartments require 10. You know, this high command requires 40. My level 3 industry takes 175 energy, you know what I mean, to run. This freaking hydroponics takes 585. You see what I mean? So you need a lot of energy, and if you run out, your assets will stop running, and you're going to end up in an economic death spiral, which is not good. So do avoid that. Make sure you've got lots of power. This is going to come from your solar panels. It's going to come from power plants. It's going to come from these gravitonic collector cards. This, by the way, is an artifact that you can find from archaeological digs, which again look like this. The colored pyramids, as you see, common, you know, rare and all that kind of stuff. So keep an eye out for those. That's where you build your recycling facilities to get these artifacts. Radioactives, you might guess what that's used for. So radioactives, you can build nuclear power plants with that, which give you tons of energy. You can also outfit your tank designs and vehicle designs with nuclear powered engines, which means they never run out of fuel. It's amazing. But of course, as you might imagine, the main use for this is nuclear weapons. Yes, there's ICBMs in this game, and yes, they're amazing. So stockpile lots of these if you can. ICBMs are super fun. They can win games. They're very late game tech. It's hard to get to them. But when you get to them, man, is it ever fun, because it's pretty much, it's a doom clock. Once somebody gets access to enough nukes, the game's over. They'll just nuke your enemies into oblivion, and you're laughing. We'll discuss more of that in the logistics video. Stay tuned. This is your soldiers, so your recruits. Obviously, you need recruits to field your armies. So recruits are gained on a turn-by-turn basis from all of your zones, assuming you have that turned on for that zone. So as an example, we can click on Kex Assault here. We can call the governor. If we say zone orders, in here we can set how many recruits we want. So max recruits per turn. We can say, okay, let's get 500 recruits or 600 recruits per turn, right? And max colonists per turn. We can set all these values. How much do we want per turn? So then we hit confirm orders. And now going forward, she's going to attempt to recruit that many recruits and that many colonists per turn. And this is based on loyalty. This is why it's important to keep your population loyalty up, because if they have a low loyalty, you won't be able to recruit anything. So if you click over here, you can see loyalty for this town happens to be 100, so we're not going to have any issues with recruiting. Colonists, similar to recruits, but instead of sending them to die in wars, you use these to populate cities, right? So if you need more workers over here, like, I wonder if you have an example here, I don't know. No. Well, if you notice one of your towns happens to not have enough, there we go. Like, for example, here, you can see this dome farm, is the number here is yellow. That means they don't have enough workers to staff this building. So we could send some colonists over here to fill that gap. So if we click colonize over here, we can say send this population. 'Cause workers, that's public workers. Population is just non-public workers, so just private economy people, just regular citizens. So let's send them 6,000 colonists. There we go, and maybe that'll fill the gaps. So there we go. So next turn, those 6,000 colonists will show up in this city, and maybe they'll start working in some of these assets and help them out a little bit. So that's what that is. So, or if you want to build a new town, when you start the town, you only have like 1,000 people there. And if you have assets you want to staff, you might struggle to get people in there. So that's what colonists are for. You can build a new town, send a bunch of people there to colonize it immediately, and get your assets up and running. So this is pretty important. Down here you have rare metals. It's used for building more high-tech stuff, like some of your high-tech armors and high-tech tanks and your walkers. They might require rare metals for that sort of thing. Sometimes solar panels might need it. Some of your higher-tech buildings might need it. So these are very important. They also sell for quite a bit of money. So if you're strapped for cash in the early game, selling rare metals that you get from your recycling plants is a great idea. Machines are used for making high-tech objects, like helicopters and walkers and things like that. And so just high-tech machines, like high-tech units. You need machines to build those. Sometimes certain buildings require them. So machines are very important. Again, you can make machines in the workshop, artisanal production of machines. So you can spend rare metal, IP, and metal to get some machines. Or you can make something called heavy industry, which will produce machines for you. And then you have high-tech parts, which is like, well, it's high-tech parts. You need these for the most high-tech units and things in the game, like high-speed rail, like this. If you were to build one of these shields for yourself, this is a GR one, but if you were to build one of these shields, you'd need that. All the high-tech stuff needs high-tech parts. It's kind of a late-game resource. It's not really easy to get. You cannot make these in the workshop, but there is a building called high-tech industry, which you can build, which will build these over time, but that's late game stuff, really. It's a basic overview of the different resources of the game. In this current save game that I loaded up from a previous game that I played, I only have one Supreme Headquarters. You can make more, but in probably 80% of games, it's completely unnecessary. If you're playing an Oceania DLC map or something like that, you can make a case. It might be a good idea to build a new SHQ over on a distant island, but in like 80% of games, you can usually get away with one Supreme Headquarters. So what happens with resources, essentially, is your assets will gather them up. They'll send them to their local zone, right? So as an example, if we go over here to this town of, of Prism Point, basically, each zone, each town, of course, is going to have its resource nodes or its production that it's doing. And so as an example, let's look at this oil node here. So what's going to happen is this oil facility belongs to this town. So what's going to happen is they're going to send the oil to this town. And then if this town happens to need oil, whether to build something or maybe to send out to units or whatever, it'll do that. And then it'll keep some in reserve for itself next turn in case it needs something. But any excess that it has that it figures it doesn't need, it will send that excess back to the supreme headquarters. Now it's important to understand it does not send it back to the capital town where the headquarters is located. Each town has its own resource inventory, but your supreme headquarters, which is this guy here, S1. So this is my supreme headquarters. This is a separate inventory, right? So you've got each of your towns has its own inventory, including your capital. It has its own inventory. But then you have the supreme headquarters, which is located at your capital generally. That has its own inventory, and that is this. This is the inventory of your supreme headquarters. So what happens is any excess resources that your towns don't need, they will send back to your supreme headquarters. So what happens is, if any town outside of the SHQ happens to need resources that it doesn't have and can't make or whatever, it will make a request of the SHQ, hey, send me this. You know, I'm missing fuel, send me fuel. So then the SHQ will send fuel via logistics, which we'll talk about later, to the town. Then the town has it to use it. So everything is centralized. All your resources are centralized on your SHQ. Now, in addition to the public economy, which you run and control directly, there's also a private economy running in the background that you don't have direct control over. So if we have a look at one of these towns here, we can maybe take a look. Bad example. Here's a good example. Okay, so our capital here of Deneba, but basically you can see we have all these sort of silver colored cards here, these little assets. These are all of our public buildings, right? So these are buildings that we own specifically. These are public buildings. But then we go down the list a little bit lower and we start seeing like these bronze colored ones, right? These are private assets. This is the private economy that builds these. They do these of their own volition. They do it independent of you. They don't consult you. They just kind of build these in the background. And they do it using private funds. So where do they get these private funds? Well, there's a number of different ways. One, you can give it to them yourself. If you call the governor, you can go zone orders. Then you can actually set a public budget. You can send, okay, I want to give them this much per turn. And then their budget will increase by that per turn. There's also certain cards you can play, stratagem cards. So if you go to zones, here's an example, private investment. You can just play this, spend some political points, and the private economy of whatever city you have targeted will get a whole bunch of money. So that's another way you can get money. But the primary way that the private economy makes money is by selling their excess resources. So the private economy creates and sells and uses resources just like the public economy does. And when they have excess resources, they're going to sell them to the traders to make money, to make private credits. And when they need resources, they're going to buy them from the traders. For example, this dome farm here, as you can see, produced 2,142 private food. So the private economy is generating that much food for themselves so that they don't starve. And then they're going to produce 355 food for us, for the public economy. So they're going to make over 2,000 food just with that asset. They're going to use what they need to feed their populace. They're going to store some of that in reserve for the next turn so they don't starve. And if they have any amount of excess from that, they're going to sell it on the market to the traders to make money. And they use that money to then build more assets. So you can see in our capital here, we've got a whole bunch of private assets that they built with the money that they've made for various sources that we just talked about. So the public economy, what they do with their excess is they send it to our supreme headquarters, versus the private economy, what they do with their excess resources is they sell it on the market. Now, as I alluded to before, if we have resources that we've produced and cannot store, we will automatically sell them. That was the forced sale thing we talked about in the treasury cash flow overview. So if we can't store resources we produce, we have to sell them or they're lost. And you can just kind of hover over here. You can see, as an example, oil, we have 43,000 and the max is 43,460 and we're making 1,600 a turn. So basically next turn we're going to have forced sales. As you can see in that pop-up, loss due to max storage reached 0. We're not quite at our capacity, but next turn we will be. So a bunch of oil they're going to attempt to sell on the market. They'll sell as much as they can. If the traders want to buy it all, great. If the traders refuse any of it, the oil is going to be wasted and lost. And on that topic, for example, if you are producing too much oil, which we arguably are right now, you can lower that production. So you can click on your oil asset right here, as an example, in Bonanza. You can see that it's producing 883 oil per turn. Maybe that's a little excessive given we're almost at our cap, so we can reduce that production. We can lower the production because these resource nodes are finite. As you can see down here, there's only 57,000 or 58,000 fuel in this hex. If we keep extracting it and just throwing it out the window because we can't sell it because we have too much, it's just going to go to waste. So This is one thing you can do. You can lower the production here. So that's basically how the economy works. So the public economy, again, they gather resources from their zones. They keep what they need. They send what they don't need back to the SHQ. And then if there's something that they need that they don't have and can't make, they'll make a request from the SHQ, who will then send it out to them via logistics. The private economy will gather resources from their private assets. They'll use what they need and they will sell what they don't, and they'll use the money from those sales to then build more stuff. So let's take a quick look at trade. So if you go over here to the right, you can click on trade, and this is where you can buy and sell resources to your heart's content. So these are all the different resources that are currently up for offer from the traders. Now, if you recall from before, the capital price indexes will give you an idea of what resources are trading at what and what their history was. So you can see metal is not as expensive as it was, but it's still pretty pricey compared to the other resources. So again, if we go back to trade, you can kind of see, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost per unit. So they have 7,400 fuel available. We could buy from them. And this is what they're charging per unit, 0.61 credits. As you can see, metal is insanely expensive. They only have 113, and they're charging 46 credits per metal, which is insane. You know what I mean? So they got all these different resources you could buy, and they have different prices based on supply, demand, and all that kind of stuff. Conversely, you can sell your resources, and again, this is what they'll pay for it. So, you know, we've got all that fuel. They're not going to give us much, but we have 108 metal that we could sell. That's not based on what we have necessarily. That's based on how much they're interested in buying. So we could sell them 108 metal at 27 credits per, which is pretty darn good. You know, we can, it's not as good as it was, but that's not bad. Rare metals are selling for 5, you know what I mean? Radioactives we could sell for 187, you know, so you can make quite a bit of money through trade. So just bear this in mind. And another factor that's really important to remember about trade is that the commander of your supreme headquarters, he's going to have a trade skill, and that's going to affect how efficient your trading is. So if you look at our guy, we'll go to reports, we'll go to cabinet overview, and SH2 commander Bova Jovansong, let's take a look at him. And he should have a trade skill. Here it is. Yeah, he's got 111 trade skill total after his base stats and all the modifiers and stuff. So 111, that's pretty darn good. So what that's going to do is when we go to make a trade, if we buy something over here, there's a chance based on his trade skill that we might get a discount. Or if we sell something based on his trade skill, we might negotiate a higher price. So let's say, you know, we sell our 108 metal for 2,000 credits. There's a chance that he might up the price. We might get more than that. Let's try it for the sake of argument. Yeah. There you go. SH2 commander managed to increase the price with 89 credits in the final bargain. You sold 108 metal. This resulted in revenue of 3,000 credits. Okay, so that's kind of where the trade skill comes in. And that was a relatively low bump. Sometimes you can get huge bumps from doing that. So it's really nice to have an SHQ commander who has a good trade skill. All right, let's take a quick look at zone management now and look at the construction and take a look at some of the assets just to give you an idea of what's going on down here in the bottom of the screen, what all this stuff means and what all this stuff is. So you want to make sure that your zones are running smoothly, that they have what they need, right, to produce all the resources and things that you need, keep everybody happy so you're not getting worker revolts and stuff. So if we click on Polymer as an example, we can take a look at some of its stats just to kind of go through them. So if we click on the first button here, it's a big town, level 3, as you see, Zone Polymer City level 3. Populace is just how many people are physically in the town. So it's a population of 67,800. To get to the next level of city, we need at least 100,000, as you see here. There's 42,000 free folk in the borders of our zone right now. So free folk are people that live in these little shanty towns that aren't actually in our city. So like in Florence, there's a bunch. In Metalwalker and Mopien, there might be some. So between all that, there's 42,000 free folk. And we could potentially attract those people to our city by making it a nicer, shinier city with lots of amenities and, you know, sewers and, you know, TV and VidCom broadcasting and, you know, all these nice perks of civilized life inside of Polymer. So once we get that up, that's what this is here. This is that barbaric thing. As we get more amenities, this will go up to higher levels of civilization and stuff, and that'll encourage, you know, some free folk to join us. So as that goes up, we'll get more people who can then toil in our assets. We have 999 zone recon, of course, because it's our zone. We see everything, and we have no spies in the zone because, again, it's our zone. Here's our governor. We can call her if we like. The next button down breaks down the population. So there's 44,000 private jobs. What does that mean? Well, if we look at our assets in the zone, we can see that we have 3 private assets. So between these 3 private assets, there's 44,000 jobs available to be worked in them. But as you see here, there is 66,000 population. And this is a bit of a weird naming convention. If we go back here, populace, population, it's a bit confusing. So just to demystify that, populace is just physically how many people are in the city total. It's what we would think of as population in the real world. Population, in quotes, in this game is how many people are in the town that are not in your public service. So this is basically a combination of unemployed people and people working in the public sector. So how is that useful? Well, it tells you if you have 44,000 private jobs and you have 66,000 non-public people in the city, that means that 22,000 people are unemployed. So there's 22,000 people worth of growth potential within the private economy. So the private economy could build more assets and they would have no problem staffing them because there's 22,000 people that are unemployed. You know what I mean? And the same goes for public stuff, but we'll get to that in a second. So private funds, that's how much money is currently in the private economy's coffers. They use this money to build new assets for themselves, and they get this money, like we talked about before, through all the various methods, but primarily through trade. As they produce excess assets, they'll sell them, make money, use that money to build more assets. Private food, they collect food of their own. As you see, they're making 900 private food a turn for themselves, and obviously they're consuming a bunch of it. But they're going to make all that food, they're going to store it. If they have excess, they'll sell it. But this is just so that they don't starve. This is not ours. We don't deal with this. We have our own stockpile of food up here. That's not that. That's different. So the private economy feeds themselves. If they run out, they can buy it. If they don't have access to it, there's emergency food you can enact via order to your governor. This is the income of the private sector. So anybody working in the private sector makes 0.001 credits per turn, basically. That's the salary. Everybody makes the same thing, right? And you can use this to your advantage if you're trying to recruit into your own assets. You can simply, again, through a governor order, you call the governor, you can set the salary of your public workers. And if you pay your public workers more than this, it'll encourage people to join your public assets instead of working for private assets. So you can kind of play with that. This is a breakdown of the private economy. So their incomes and expenses. So they made 551 credits and they lost 128 credits to their various expenses. So they're making money, which is great. This is how much money we made in service tax. This is how much money we made in income tax. We've talked about those before. This right here, next light industry, it's telling you this is their next planned project. So once they have enough money here to build a light industry, they're going to build that. And that's actually really good. We want them to build that because that will give us some industry too. The light industries will help give us industry. And that's one of the greatest things ever. So but that's great. That'll tell you what they're planning to build next once they have the money, and they are not in debt. And they can go into debt if they have not a lot of money and they desperately need something. They can buy it from the traders and go into debt. So just keep an eye out for that. You can bail them out of their debts by giving them money via certain cards, but again, that's down the road. If we click on the next button, this is our public sector. So as you see, there's 600 public jobs. So again, this is our only public asset. It's our supreme command bunker, and there's 600 people working it. Everybody's staffed. We have 1,500 workers in our employ right now, so which means there's a bunch of them that are unemployed. Our salary is 0.005 credits. So our public sector workers make 5 times what the private sector makes, and that will make them happy, right? So you can see over here, worker happiness increased with 2 points due to their remuneration compared to private. So the public sector is very happy about the fact that they make 5 times what the private sector workers make, right? We got some happiness increase due to an event. We lost a little bit of happiness due to danger. That's this right here. Let's go back here. This is our hiring policy. This is basically, you can set this via the governor as well, basically how you hire and fire your employees. So like, do you hire them and just keep them even if there's no job for them and wait for the job to appear? Or if their job gets canceled, do you just fire them and send them back to the private economy? That kind of stuff. That's what that is. There's no production penalties next turn, so that's what that is. Regular capital zone. This is just giving you some more stats. Admin strain. This is what happens when you have an asset which is more than 6 hexes away from your zone. So like if your zone was bigger than 6 hexes in radius, like for example, like let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I built an asset out here and still claimed it within the polymer zone, that would start generating admin strain. And admin strain is basically a penalty on your production. So the point of that is you want to keep your assets close to your city within 6 hexes, or you'll start getting admin strain. Now the private economy can just randomly build assets on its own, and sometimes it'll do that outside of the range of that, and that can generate admin strain as well, so just watch out for that. The investment budgeted and all that kind of stuff, this is to do with how much money you're giving the zone per turn. So you can go into your governor orders, you can call the governor, and you can say, how much am I budgeting every turn, right? And this just goes right into their private economy, right? So if you want to help them out that way, you can. Emergency food is currently not authorized. Again, this is another order through your governor. If you want to be able to let the private economy dip into your public stocks in case of starvation, you can allow that here. This is just basically stuff that's, again, through your governor. You know, how much bonus are you getting for recruits, how much bonus, like signing bonuses, are you giving for colonists and all that kind of stuff, income tax, sale tax, and all that kind of stuff. And this zone is attached to the first Supreme Headquarters. Again, you can have more than one, but for all intents and purposes, again, 80% of your games, you're not going to need that. With a proper logistics network, that's not necessary. Obviously, exceptions notwithstanding, like potentially some of the Oceania DLCs, it might be simpler. You know, some of those maps, it might be simpler to have a second one, or, you know, whatever. But again, 80% of your games, you're not really going to need another one, so that's fine. This talks about your population happiness, their loyalty, which we talked about is very important to keep up their loyalty so you can recruit people. There's no hunger in the zone, which is good. And then this talks about your casualties. While you take casualties in battle, your people can start to get upset. There's a stat called casualty tolerance, which you can raise with stratagem cards. But basically, you don't want to lose too many people in battle, or your population might start getting upset. Worker happiness, again, there's not much to see here. No hunger, everybody's happy, 91%, that's good. Barbaric, again, this is a measure of your amenities and how nice it is to live in this town. Right now it sucks, it's barbaric, because there's nothing here. There's a high command bunker and some crap assets, like there's nothing here. So when you build nice little things for your people, they get happier. So as an example, quality of life score is 0. And this is based on kind of these different scores. So health score, like, do you have sewers in your town for sanitation reasons? Do you have a hospital to take care of your people? And stuff like that, right? So as you build those types of things, this will go up. Security score, like, do you have a barracks, or do you have like a security outpost, or things like that to keep your people safe? That'll drive up this score. Education, do you have a university? Do you have science-related things in your zone, right? Like schools, or, you know, there's other different perks you can get that are related to that. Like, you can get zoos. You can build private zoos, and that'll drive up your education because people can go to the zoo and look at the animals and stuff like that, right? Entertainment, do you have VidCom broadcasting because people will watch TV? You know, do you have brothels? Yes, brothels are a thing. You know, do you have all these things to keep your population entertained, right? Housing, is there places for them to stay? This is actually kind of a special one. He introduced that just a few patches ago, a number of patches ago, but semi-recently. This is basically to keep your people in town. Over time, you will see every now and then people will just move out of your zones. So you want to build private sector housing and public sector housing to keep the workers, to give them somewhere to live so that they don't just like up and leave your zone. So this is kind of important too. Health points, security points. This is the raw point value. So let's say like a hospital is worth, say, 100 points as an example, right? And it's, you know, a barracks is worth 100 security points. And, you know, like a VidCom might be worth 100 points. And then based on the size of your town, that number of flat points will count towards varying degrees of scores here. So as an example, let's say you have 100 health points from a hospital. That might be all well and good for a small village, but in a big metropolis, one single hospital, well, that's not enough. So then your health score goes down. You got to keep upgrading your hospital level. You see what I mean? To keep up with the larger city. So that's the relationship here. So you need to continuously improve the amount of amenity points you have to match with the growing size of your city so that your score doesn't go down. So you want to drive these scores up to get your QOL score up, which makes this go up and makes people want to come to your town. And as you recall from before, the civilization score of our nation is based partially on the civilization score of all your zones averaged out. And this, again, as we talked about before, just informs the level of assets that you're able to build. So if we go to construct here, as you remember, we can build an ice mining level 1, but we won't be able to build any of the higher level ice mine facilities because we need to get those scores up. So that's the importance of these scores here. Culture adaptation. This is basically, as it sounds, it's our culture. So right now we are Barnesian, which is fine. That's our culture. But when we conquer another nation's zone, well, those people in that city, they're not going to be Barnesian. They're going to be whatever their culture is. And so we need to slowly adapt their culture to our culture in order to get their loyalty up. And of course, we want their loyalty to be able to recruit from them. Then there's stats like tradition, fertility, aggression, which are really interesting. I think fertility actually affects the birth rate. And all these other interesting sort of sort of stats on the, I think this is something to do with cultural adaptation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, so it's just these little sort of minor stats that aren't incredibly important. And then you have some basic logistical stats of your city. But again, we'll leave that for the logistics video. It's also important to note that with regards to your civilization score and all that, how we talked about how, you know, all your cities contribute to your civilization score and that kind of dictates, you know, what kind of levels of assets you can build. Only incorporated zones affect that. Unincorporated zones don't contribute to that. So what's an unincorporated zone? Well, right here, Polymer, this is our capital. This is already incorporated. This is our capital zone, so it's incorporated. But if we go to our governor over here, so we go to our governor, we give her a call. We can click zone orders. It looks like we already have that on our desk. We can click zone orders. And if we go up here to the zone decisions, here's the zone orders. If you look here, there's a thing that says zone occupied / incorporated. So you can switch it between regular zone and unincorporated zone. So what this basically means, a regular zone will contribute to your overall civilization level. You'll also collect taxes from it. The private sector will generate things for you with their assets. So for example, you know, as we said before, this agri-dome here is producing mostly private food, but it's also producing some public food here. And that only happens with regular zone. If you put unincorporated zone, you won't get any of that. They'll just work for themselves. So the benefit of doing unincorporated zone is that their happiness rises quite a bit faster. So when you conquer a brand new city, you're better off leaving them unincorporated and letting their happiness build up, and then you could switch them over to incorporated zone and start taxing them. And over here we have just a random tab that's got some basic information of your empire in general, which I'm going to be totally honest, I don't generally look at this. I mean, it's quick info, but you can look at this if you like. Though this is very helpful when you're looking at other regimes. Alright, let's take a really quick look at research. So if we go to the management tab, we can click tech. And here's all the different techs in the game. So you start with these early techs. This is just basic stuff. Carbine, that's your basic starting gun. Farming, you know, wind traps, industry, and virus suits. It's just basic stuff. You always start with this stuff. Then you have your basic tech. You know, you got your power plants, which are obviously pretty important if you don't want to run out of power. Universities, like we talked about, if you want to get your education score up, that's what you want right there. You got to research that. Solar energy, that's obviously solar panels. This is going to take rare metals to build, so keep that in mind. And this helps you obviously gather energy from the sun. And as you recall, if you look over here in our reports, planet statistics, as you recall, solar panels mod 142%, so it might be good to build some of those. Ammo factory, like we talked about, that's going to be very key. Hospital for your health score, barracks for your security score. It also increases the rate at which your guys gain experience when they're training in the zone. Automatic rifle, again, this is a military tech. It's an improvement on the original rifle. So you've got all these different things, you know. So there's tons and tons of techs in here. So the way this screen works is you can see these lines going from the different tech groupings to the other ones. So what this means is you need to fully research 4 techs within this group, and then you will unlock these 2, you see? And then, let's say if you were to fully research 4 techs within chemistry, you would then unlock applied chemistry, advanced chemistry, and applied management, right? And so that's how you use these lines here. So if you're looking for a particular tech, like, oh, I want nuclear plant, you need to research 4 here, which would unlock engineering. Then you need to research 4 here, which would unlock this, then 4 here, which would unlock that, and then you can start trying to get nuclear plant. So that's kind of how this works. And so in order to unlock techs, you need to discover them first. So you see here we have green. Green means we've researched the tech, we have the tech, we know it. Gray means we don't know the tech, we have not discovered the tech, but it is possible to discover it. Like as you see right here, this is still kind of dark gray. It is not possible for us to discover high-speed machine gun, let alone research it. There's different prerequisites, as you can see. We need to have automatic rifle before we could even try and discover high-speed machine gun. But we could potentially discover these other gray ones. So if we want to get access to these economic techs, for example, and we do, we need to call our economic director and tell him to start discovering. So if we go over here, we can call him, but we might actually have... Yeah, so yeah, it's already here because we just appointed him last turn or whatever. And I reloaded the save, that's why it's not set already. I ended up reloading it. So normally we would call this guy and click priorities, but the decision's already on our desk. This is what it is. So we can change these all we want. So we wanted him to discover more. So we can crank discovery up, but there's a bit of a trick here that I think is worth noting. So every time you call this guy to change these priorities, it's going to cost you a few political points, and these can be scarce. And the other thing is you can only do it once a turn, right? So if you want to balance out your discovery with your research and constantly be discovering and constantly be researching, that's fine. You can do that. Something that I'll show you that I like to do. What I usually do, I drag discovery right to 0 all the time and lock it. And then you might think, well, how do you discover stuff if you're not if you have discovery on 0? Well, the way it works in Shadow Empire is if whatever research points you allocate, if you're not actually researching a tech, then whatever research points you've allocated go into the discovery task by default. So if you want to do a setup where you're focusing heavily on researching something and then discovering and then focusing heavily on researching, so if you'd rather take that approach, you can, and you can save yourself a few political points so you're not coming back in here constantly adjusting, okay, now I want to discover, okay, now I want to research, okay, now I want to discover, and so back and forth, right? You can just put discovery on 0, and then when you want to discover a new tech, you just simply tell him to research nothing, and all of the research points will then go into discovery. So that's personally what I like to do. If you'd rather just discover and research at the same time, there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But just know that this is an option that you can do. So that's what I do anyway. Let's do that. So now he's going to be discovering. Despite discovery being at 0, it's a bit misleading. But if we go into the budget now, you can see the Economic Council is putting 0% into discovery, and yet we're putting 10 bureaucratic points. So that's how you discover without actually putting any allocation towards discovery. Like, you're still spending the bureaucratic points. You're still going to the research task, but when it sees no research target, it just diverts those bureaucratic points back to discovery, where it then discovers techs. And you can even tell how long it's going to take. So let's say, as an example, we want hospital, right, to drive up our health score. Well, you can see at the bottom, discovery cost 80 bureaucratic points, research cost 160 bureaucratic points. What do we do with that? Well, if we go back to the tech screen, we can see that we're putting 10 bureaucratic points into the discovery task every turn, which means that, give or take, based on some die rolls of the Economic Council, we can expect this to show up in 8 turns, give or take. This is not exact, because again, there's die rolls involved with his skill. He might accelerate that. He might get a bad roll and slow it down, but more or less 8 turns plus or minus a few turns. And then once you go to research it, as you can see, 160, so 16 turns. Again, this is the importance of bureaucratic points. You can allocate more of your percentage away from the Supreme Command Council and to your Economic Council if you want to research this faster. Better idea, build a bureaucratic office, right? Again, as you see, if we click on our capital, we go to construct, government, bureaucratic offices, 50 more bureaucratic points per turn. That's at base, by the way. That's before the governor bonuses kick in, which we talked about earlier. Remember how we talked about happy governors get bonuses? Well, 50 bureaucratic points at base, and as long as we keep our governor happy and he has some basic skill or whatever, he'll give that a slight bonus. And when you consider the fact that we're only allocating 56 bureaucratic points right now, that's going to almost double our bureaucratic point output, you see? So that's the value of these bureaucratic assets. Now, there are a few key techs in here that you really want to get as quick as you can. You're going to want some kind of a power generating station, so be it the power plant or the solar energy plant. Now, in our particular case, we're getting a nice little bonus to solar energy, so you might consider this. The power plant runs on fuel, so if you have a lot of fuel, maybe you go for this, but in this personal case, I'd probably go for this right now, because we don't have access to any fuel nodes as it is right now. The ammo factory is absolutely key. You must have that going into the mid-game, or you're just going to absolutely grind your economy to a halt trying to afford all your ammo. Sealed roads is pretty key. You're going to want that to help your logistics system, which we'll talk about later. And you're going to want these basic military techs so you can get access to these, because combat armor and Gauss small arms, that's a big power spike. So when you're designing your units, which we'll talk about later, when you're designing units, this is a big jump. It's a big power spike from these earlier techs. So once you can get access to that, that might be a nice little timing thing for you to move out. As I talked about before, the applied sciences are just amazing. Don't skip on them. Again, as we talked about, conventional small arms as an example, for all your bullet-based guns, like small arms, they'll get a bonus. So the more points you have into this, the bigger a bonus you'll get when designing a unit that uses conventional small arms. So if we have, like, you know, say 50 points, 50% into conventional small arms optimization, and then we design an infantry unit, when he comes out, he's going to get a big bonus to his attack scores because of this. Same thing with conventional gun optimization. That would be for the tank guns, or, you know, personal armor optimization. He'll get more protection from his armor because of that. And, you know, there's all these really nice applied techs. These are really, really, really key. Logistical optimization is insanely key. That's really, really good. You know, so there's a lot of little techs in here, like metal soil filtration. That's a huge one. This is basically metals, rare metals, and radioactives out of thin air, essentially. So if you have a planet that's got not really great access to metals and things like that, you can go for this one. It just pulls it out of the deep ground. And this is based on like heavy metals of the planet, as you may remember from Planet Generation. So the more heavy metals you have, the better you're going to get here. Down here, you've got your nuclear tech. So your nuclear plant, you got tactical nukes and all that kind of stuff. And then down here, your early orbital, this is what you want, baby. This is what you want. This is your ICBMs. This is like my favorite tech here. Yes, I'm a psycho. And then down here, you've got all kinds of crazy stuff like shield generators and beam guns. And over here, you've got battle dress. This is like power armor, essentially. Heavy battle dress. You got heavy power armor. You've got walkers. You can make mechs in this game. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can research. You can always look at all these and see what they do. So yeah, that's a basic overview of the tech tree. Let's take a look at some of the assets you can build in your cities, just to give you a rough idea of what they are and what they do. So when you start the game, you're not going to have access to all the assets. Some of them you gain access to by researching. So you can see we have our different categories of things that we can build. Yellow means we can't build it for whatever reason. Yeah, can't build this inside the thing because we already got one, but like we could build this outside of the town. Mining, these are our different mining facilities that we can't build for whatever reason, but we could get wind traps. So agriculture obviously gives food. Mining, this is where you get your metals, get your rares, get your radioactives. Energy, of course, you get your power plants. So scavenging furnaces will consume the scav points on a hex in some ruins. So you see here we have ruins and they've got scav points. Normally you build those recyclers on top of here to consume the scav points and generate your metals, rare metals, and your oil. But you can also choose instead to just build these scav furnaces on them in an emergency just to get some energy. You also have organic furnaces, which you can build on forests, and they'll consume the trees to generate energy. Industry, of course, here's all your industrial assets. Recycling under mining, by the way, that's super important. This is really important for the early game to start getting your basic resources in. These are super critical. Government stuff, again, bureaucrat offices are really important. High command bunker, you can upgrade that if you like, some more bonus points for your political generation. Rad treatment center, I've never built one of those, to tell you the truth. I can see that in a multiplayer game, you wanting that, because this will lower the effect of radiation in the zone, but you don't get nuked often. The AI will nuke you, but it is incredibly rare. If I was playing multiplayer, this would be a little more important. Logistics, this is going to be super important. We'll talk about this in a logistics video, but you're going to need these to get supplies flowing from city to city, flowing out to your troops and all that kind of stuff. And as technology unlocks, of course, you're going to access to a lot more things in here. But this is the basic idea of what you've got in here. I just want to touch really quick on these numbers here, what they mean. So let's say, for example, we'll click on one of these ruins, right? And you can construct things anywhere as long as you have logistical points to it, and we'll talk about that later. But if you click construct here, let's say, for example, let's say we wanted to build one of those recycling facilities, right? And that'd be a great idea to do on this tile. So what this is, recycling facility 1. So it's going to take 2 rounds to build. So every round, so for 2 rounds, each round it's going to consume 2,000 workers. Well, it's not going to consume them, it's not going to eat them. But every turn you're going to have to basically provide 2,000 people to physically build it. And you're going to have to provide 50 metal per turn to build it. And you're going to have to provide 125 industrial points and 1 machine. So 2,000 of these, 50 of those, 125 of those, 1 of those for 2 turns. So a total of, 100 metal, 250 of these and 2 of those. And once it's done building, it's going to basically take 2,100 workers, and those 2,100 workers are going to produce 10 rares, 30 oil, 40 metal. You see, so this is the input, this is the output. Again, if we go over to like, I don't know, agriculture, right? If we were to build an agricultural dome, like a farming dome here, right? So for 2 rounds, we would have to put up 5,000 workers to build it. We would have to put 2 machines, because it's 1 per turn, 200 metal, and 100 IP. And then when it's built, it's going to consume every turn 10 energy, 200 water, and it's going to take 550 people working it, and it's going to produce 200 food. So this is what these numbers mean and how they work. And if you click on the picture, it'll basically show you all the different levels of that particular asset. So for this, the agricultural dome facility, level 1, again, construction costs, it's the same thing we saw. Upkeep costs, That's to prevent it from breaking down. And then the production cost, this is actually to keep it running. So again, production costs, it takes 200 water, 10 energy, and 5,000 workers, and spits out 200 food. If we upgrade it to level 2, again, the construction costs to go to level 2, it would take 2 rounds. And each round we would need another 125 metal, IP, machines, and so on. So it gets more and more expensive. And then, of course, to keep that running, every turn we need to put up 10,000 workers, 28 energy, 450 water, and in return it would produce 500 food. So you see, as you produce these buildings, they get more and more expensive, but they produce more and more. Now you might think, well, should I just build a second level 1 agricultural dome? And in general, no. In general, it's more efficient to upgrade an existing facility than it is to build another one. For example, if you were to build a second agricultural dome facility, yeah, you would be spending the same amount of workers. You know, you'd have 2 facilities at 5,000 or 1 facility at 10,000, but this 1 facility at 10,000 is making 500 food, whereas your other 2 facilities are only making 200, so that's a total of 400 food, right? So it becomes more and more worker efficient as you go on to simply upgrade as opposed to build new ones. And different versions of agricultural facilities will be more or less worker efficient. And it's a good idea to go through these numbers and take a look and see which of these facilities is more efficient for you, like how much they produce as you go down and build them up and build them up. Like, you know, a level 3 recycling facility, there you go, 90 fuel, 120 mil, and 30 rare. So they get better as they go. So it's a good idea to keep upgrading as much as you can. So when you're looking at these asset cards down here within your cities, as we talked about before, the silver ones are your public assets, the bronze ones are the private assets, and the gold ones are free folk and hex perks. So for example, Florence, you can see, is gold. So I'll show you the breakdown of the cards themselves. So basically at the top you've got city, that means it's inside a city, as opposed to, you can see this asset here, it's in Mopiend, which is this. You know, this is Florence, right? This is Metal Walker over here, right? But these 4 are within our city. This green light here means that it's active. You can set it to like mothball, which means nobody's in there producing stuff, but there's like a maintenance crew just to keep the building from falling apart. So, you know, if you want to keep an asset but you don't want it running right now, you can mothball it. You can close it, which means nobody maintains it and it'll slowly decay. You can disband it and all that stuff. And you can also set the production level. So again, if, like our example before with the oil, if you're producing tons of oil per turn and you don't need it all, you're just sucking oil out of the ground and throwing it in the garbage because you can't find a buyer, you can lower the production levels, which will also lower the amount of workers it takes to work them. So if you're low on workers, you can do that. So basically the way that works is, in the middle, of course, you have the image, but basically you have the input and then the output, right? So this city asset here, this high command bunker, is using 600 worker points a turn. It's using 10 energy a turn, and it's outputting 25 political bonus points. Again, those aren't political points, it's bonus points. It's that calculation. And it's also outputting 10 bureaucratic points. Same thing over here. This dome farm, which is a private asset, we don't own this. We can nationalize it if we had the money, which is 1,000 credits, which we don't have. But it's taking 39,000 workers, private workers, to work in that. It's outputting 900 private food, so 900 foods going to the private economy, and it's outputting 110 public food. So we're actually getting 110 food for ourselves from this. And it's also outputting 36 private credits, so as we talked about before, that goes to their private economy so they can build stuff, right? So it's basically input, output. On the left-hand side, you see a bar here. This one is currently empty. This is the damage bar. So in cases of war, you know, if your city's being attacked or bombed or whatever, these assets will take damage. So as you see here, completely inoperable at 200 points, 100% certain of asset loss at 1,200 points. So as it takes damage from battle, it'll start to produce less and less, and once it takes 1,200 damage points, it's destroyed. Now with regards to damage, there's a specific thing you can build called bunkerization. So if you go into here, you go to logistics, right here, bunkerization. This basically reduces the structural damage in this hex. So if you build these, you get bunker points, which basically absorbs damage when stuff's being attacked in the zone. So, you know, if you're in an area of heavy fighting or you're concerned about getting bombed or whatever, you can build bunkerization, and that will lower the amount of damage your assets takes. This green bar is the production level of the asset, and right now it's producing 100% because it's meeting all of its requirements. So if we click on it, you can see over here, start turn of asset log, paid 1 worker point for upkeep, paid all upkeep costs, did full upkeep, paid 5 worker points for production, paid the 10 energy it needs for production, paid all the production costs, and it produced 10 political bonus points and 10 bureaucratic points, right? So Basically, as long as the asset's getting everything it needs, including logistical points, which again we'll talk about later, if it gets everything it needs, it'll produce at 100%. If it's damaged, it'll produce less. If it's not getting enough workers or not getting enough energy or any of the other inputs, if it's not getting what it needs, it won't produce everything that it's supposed to. And this yellow bar is just a level of the upkeep. So as you can see, this is 100% upkeep, which basically means all the upkeep costs are paid, which means the asset is not going to decay. Another handy thing you can do with regards to your resources and economy, you can click on this items tab. And as we talked about before, I just want to touch on it again real quick. This just goes over the in and outs of your zone in terms of resources. So again, you can see that the zone produced 170 food, it produced 40 fuel, and it produced 100 energy. We didn't get any in from any other zones or SHQs. We consumed 11 food, and we sent 167 out to the SHQ, thus keeping 22 in our personal stockpiles for this zone. So this is a nice way to see what's coming in out of your zones and what's being produced and stuff. And the other way you can kind of access similar information is over here in the asset area. So example, you go here, you go to your city, Palmer, that's our only city for now. You can see the assets, but over here you can see at the start of the turn, this is what we've got going on in our zone. So again, food, we consumed 11, we produced 170, the SHQ picked up 167 of them for its stockpile, and we kept 22 in our zone inventory. There's even a little preview mode here which talks about what's going to go on in the next turn. These are basically predictions the game's making as to what the next turn's going to look like in terms of your zone stock and all that kind of stuff. Basically it's saying right now the zone has 1051 in its inventory, and based on what the zone's going to be producing and how much the SHQ expects to pick up, it expects to have 1147 next turn. So you can kind of get an idea of what the game expects to happen with regards to your zone here. And finally, let's take a really quick look at diplomacy. So we have some nations around us. We have Ammonon territory, we have Altenar Empire, and we have some non-aligned down here. So let's take a look at Altenar Empire, just as an example. So based on our recon level of this regime, which right now is pretty much nothing because we don't have any spies on there, so we don't know much about them. We know pretty much nothing. So we'll use Altenar Empire as a bit of an example. You can see that they're a minor regime, but you see we don't know much else about them. We have very little info on them because we have no spies in their territory, and therefore we have no recon on them, and therefore we have no information on them. So you can send spies into their territory if you like. I don't think we have any right now, but in the covert ops section there's send spy. So then you spend the card, you target the regime, and then the next turn you have spies, you get a little bit of recon. But right now we don't know too much about them. We do know that they're a minor regime, which means they're probably, asterisk, probably weakish, depending on their culture, depending on what kind of minor they are. Most of them are weak, some of them are strong. We do see that they've got some bikers approaching us and some other units there, so we don't really know too much about them, what their intentions are. This is right here, this is their relationship with us, which is pretty low. Unclear, that's their attitude towards us. That can be things like friendly or hostile or blackmail, or it just gives you an idea of what they think of us and what their intentions towards us are. But right now we know nothing about them, so it's unclear. It says culture unknown, but we do know that they're a minor regime. We have one recon on them, which is basically nothing. We know nothing about them. You can play stratagem on them. So right now we only have one card offer protection, so you can do that, but there's various cards you can play, like you can, offer like peace, or you can offer to make them a client state, or you can just, non-aggression pacts, all that kind of stuff. There's all these different cards you can get. If you have the Foreign Affairs Council, you can have access to a lot more cards for that. So if we go over here to the help file, we can say stratagem encyclopedia, and if we go to foreign affairs, here's all these different cards you can get, like open contact and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's all these different cards you can get to do with diplomacy. Some of them are related to minor regimes, some of them are related to major regimes. You can get lots of these cards if you have that council. You can still get a few of them if you don't have that particular council, but if you're looking to play a diplomatic game, you might want to look into the Foreign Affairs Council. So there's a number of different things you can do. You can go to war with them, you can diplo-annex them, you become friends with them. You can get cards that can eventually subjugate them. You offer to protect them, you can become allies with them, and then eventually, if they really like you, you can then attempt to merge them into your empire, which can be kind of fun sometimes, because occasionally you can run into aliens, like sentient aliens, like lizard men, or, cephaloids, or all these weird little alien, races, or like mutants or whatever, and you can potentially annex them. And what's fun about that is, while their troops aren't terribly strong usually, they don't tend to require supply. And again, we'll get into logistics later, but just the long and short of it, you need to keep your troops in supply. But some of these miners, they don't need supply. Their troops just live off the land. But you can use these kind of unique miners that don't need supply to go deep into enemy territory and mess with the enemy's logistics, right? So there's all these neat things you can do with those special troops. And they're just special. They're neat and they're cool. So it's kind of fun to play with them sometimes. When it comes to major regimes, of which we don't see any right now, you can actually form victory pacts with them. So you can say, okay, well, we'll combine our victory scores and we can try and take over the world like together, do like an allied victory, which could potentially be kind of a fun thing in like a co-op multiplayer setting. But the primary thing that I think people do with diplomacy is to do what I call diplomatically paralyze your enemies. So basically what that would mean is, as an example here, right, Atanar Empire. Let's say I didn't want to deal with them. Let's say I wanted to, you know, conquer these non-aligned forces and all this other stuff in peace and not have to worry about my northeastern border here, right? What I could do is I could play like a proposed peace card on the Atanar Empire, and if they accepted, we'd be at peace, like a non-aggression pact, and then they would have to respect our borders. Granted, we couldn't attack them, but they can't attack us because they've signed that pact, and then we'd be free to basically do whatever we want on the other side of the map, and they're basically frozen there. So that's the primary use that I see with diplomacy. People tend to use it to kind of freeze certain empires and basically isolate their enemies to pick apart one by one rather than take everybody on at once. There is a small caveat to that. You can still declare war on a neighbor who you have peace with. It just might cost you a lot of happiness. So as you see here, our relationship is 26. So if we were to declare war on these guys, if we were at peace with them, like right now we have fluid borders. That's what this white means. So basically we can change our borders with these guys anytime we want, right? We just took that hex off of them and they don't care. Because we have fluid borders. We don't have any particular agreements one way or another. But if we were to make a peace agreement with them, and we still had this low relation, 26%, we could declare war on them with very little penalty. Like, we might get a bit of fist profile, and a couple of our leaders might be pissed. But overall, we wouldn't suffer much. But if we had a high relationship with them, and we broke that truce, we would take a huge hit to our happiness. So you can always break truces. It just might really hurt you to do. And the AI, the higher level your relationship with them, the less likely they are to do it. So you can pretty much paralyze the different empires around you and focus on one at a time if you want to do it that way. Which is the most common use that I see other people using the Foreign Affairs Council for. Another trick you can use, of course, is every now and then they're going to offer a non-aggression pact with you. So these guys might do it, they might not. They'll say, hey, let's sign a non-aggression pact and respect each other's borders. Well, you can say yes immediately, but quite often what I'll do is in fact, usually I'll just say no, but if you really want to do it, if you really want to do a non-aggression pact, what you can do is rather than accepting it right away, you can just take a bunch of their territory on that turn and then accept it, and then they'll have to accept the changed borders. So it's just kind of one little trick you can use. But all in all, when it comes to diplomacy, pretty much this is your relation. A high relation will dissuade them from wanting to attack you. This is their attitude towards you, so this will give you a good idea what their intentions are towards you, so just be careful of that. Minor regime, major regime, giving you an idea of what kind of empire they are, if they're strong, if they're weak. Stratagems, you can play various stratagems on them. You can form alliances, you can form victory pacts, you can diplomatics them eventually, you can offer to protect them. So there's all these different things you can do with diplomacy if you want to play that way. But overall, I think this video has gone on long enough, so if you made it to the end, I really appreciate you watching. So in this video, we've covered leaders, factions, covered reports and the dashboard and the profiles and all that stuff. We've covered the economy, the resources, how they work, how the trade system works. We've covered a little bit of zone management, talking about how to build stuff, talking a little bit about the assets, how to keep your zone basically stable. We've looked a little bit at the research system, and we've touched briefly on the diplomacy system. In the next video, we're to go into logistics. That's going to be the big one. Logistics is arguably the most important facet of this entire game, so that's going to be a really good one. Don't miss it. But for now, I think that's going to be it, guys. So thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the likes and the comments and on the videos. You guys are great. As always, just let me know if there's anything specific you want to know or you want me to talk about. Let me know what you think. But for now, I think that's going to do it. So as always, thanks so much for watching, guys. And we'll see you later.